How to transform anxiety into calm, Buddhist wisdom. Anxiety has become one of the defining experiences of modern existence. It weaves itself into the fabric of daily life, manifesting as restlessness, nervous anticipation, fear of failure, or an invisible weight pressing upon the chest. For some, it is the constant undercurrent that disrupts sleep and steals joy. For others, it is a sudden wave that arrives without warning, leaving them trembling in uncertainty. While science has provided explanations and remedies through medicine, therapy, and cognitive approaches, many still seek a deeper wisdom that speaks to the root of this affliction, one that connects not only to the mind, but also to the spirit. Buddhism, with its millennia-old teachings, offers precisely this kind of wisdom. At its core, the Buddhist path is about liberation from suffering by understanding its causes and cultivating practices that nurture clarity, equanimity, and compassion. Anxiety, in this framework, is not a mysterious disease of the modern world, but one more expression of the universal human struggle against impermanence, craving, and aversion. By understanding anxiety through the lens of Buddhist philosophy, one can uncover not only practical methods for calming the mind, but also profound insights into the very nature of existence. Transforming anxiety into calm is not an overnight process. It requires a willingness to look inward, to face discomfort, and to practice disciplines that slowly reshape the mind's habitual responses. The teachings of the Buddha remind us that calm is not something to be gained from the outside world, but cultivated within. It is a skill, a discipline, and ultimately a state of being that arises naturally when the causes of agitation are understood and released. Understanding the roots of anxiety through the Four Noble Truths. Anxiety, though it often appears as a chaotic storm of thoughts and emotions, is not without order. It arises from specific causes and conditions, just as the Buddha described suffering itself in the Four Noble Truths. To truly transform anxiety into calm, one must look at it not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a messenger pointing toward underlying truths of human existence. The Four Noble Truths provide the perfect lens for this exploration. The first noble truth declares that life, in its conditioned form, is marked by suffering, dukkha. Anxiety is one of the clearest manifestations of this truth. It is the gnawing unease that accompanies uncertainty, the tightness of heart when contemplating loss, the relentless questioning of what if. For many, the recognition of anxiety feels like a personal failing, but Buddhism reframes it as part of the shared human condition. To feel anxious is to participate in the universal struggle of existence. This insight alone can soften the self-condemnation that so often intensifies anxiety. The second noble truth identifies the origin of suffering, craving, and attachment. Anxiety often arises from clinging to the illusion of control. We crave certainty in a world that is inherently uncertain. We attach ourselves to outcomes, relationships, and identities as though they were permanent, only to find that reality refuses to obey our desires. Anxiety erupts when the mind senses this instability. For instance, one may worry endlessly about losing a job, not because the job itself is permanent, but because one's identity, security, and self-worth have become tied to it. By examining the craving at the root of this fear, we begin to loosen its grip. The third noble truth offers hope. The cessation of suffering is possible. If anxiety arises from clinging and craving, then letting go, even partially, opens the door to calm. This is not about suppressing anxiety or pretending it does not exist, but about altering the relationship one has with it. By no longer identifying with the anxious thought, by seeing it as a passing condition rather than a defining truth, one experiences a moment of liberation. This practice, though small, is a glimpse of the calm the Buddha promised. The fourth noble truth prescribes the Eightfold Path, which provides a practical framework for addressing anxiety at its roots. Right view encourages us to see impermanence clearly, reminding us that no fearful scenario lasts forever. Right intention directs us to cultivate thoughts of kindness and renunciation rather than fear and grasping. Right mindfulness and right concentration offer tools to anchor the mind in the present moment, where anxiety often dissolves. Each step of the path can be applied directly to the anxious mind, offering not only temporary relief, but long-term transformation. In understanding anxiety through the Four Noble Truths, we begin to see that it is not an alien force to be eradicated, but a teacher pointing us back to the truth of impermanence, the futility of clinging, and the possibility of liberation. This insight transforms anxiety from an obstacle into a doorway, a reminder that calm is not found in controlling life, but in releasing the need to do so. As you reflect on this first teaching, remember that the journey toward calm is gradual. Each insight builds upon the last, and each practice, no matter how small, plants the seed of liberation. If this exploration has offered you clarity, guidance, or even a moment of peace, I invite you to continue walking this path with me. And before moving forward, let me ask you kindly, subscribe to this channel so that together we can keep exploring the wisdom that transforms anxiety into calm and suffering into serenity. The practice of mindful breathing and presence. To transform anxiety into calm, one of the most essential and profound practices offered by Buddhist wisdom is mindful breathing. On the surface, breathing may appear too simple, almost trivial, as if something so ordinary could not possibly stand against the tidal wave of anxious thoughts that dominate the mind. Yet the Buddha himself pointed repeatedly to the breath as a gateway to liberation, a reminder that the most powerful medicine for the restless heart lies not in complicated theories, but in the very rhythm of life itself. When anxiety grips the mind, it propels thoughts forward into imagined futures, scenarios of catastrophe and uncertainty. The mind spins in anticipation of events that may never occur, and the body reacts as if the danger were already real. The heart races, the breath quickens, the muscles tighten, and the whole being becomes a theater of agitation. The practice of mindful breathing interrupts this cycle. It does not require us to control the world, or even to suppress the anxious thought. It requires only that we anchor ourselves in the immediate reality of inhalation and exhalation. Each breath becomes a reminder that the present moment is alive, available and free from the imagined dangers that the anxious mind projects. To begin this practice, one simply notices the breath. At first, the anxious person may find that the breath feels shallow or irregular, but this is precisely why the act of noticing matters. Instead of unconsciously allowing the breath to be dragged around by agitation, the practitioner brings awareness to its rhythm. One can silently note, breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. This gentle recognition places a boundary between the storm of thoughts and the steady rhythm of the body. The mind, instead of being lost in an imagined future, comes home to the undeniable reality of this moment. The air entering, the air leaving. The more one practices, the more the breath reveals its power. It is not only a physiological function, but also a bridge between body and mind. When the breath is rushed, shallow and erratic, the mind tends to mirror this chaos. When the breath is steady, calm and full, the mind follows suit. This is why in countless Buddhist traditions, mindful breathing is the first and foundational meditation practice. It is not about chasing mystical states, but about stabilizing the mind and creating the ground upon which deeper insight can grow. For those suffering from anxiety, this grounding is invaluable. Anxiety is often compared to a fire, feeding on every fearful thought. Mindful breathing is like a cool stream, flowing gently, extinguishing the flames not with force, but with steady presence. The practice of mindful breathing also cultivates a subtle but transformative shift in perspective. When we become deeply aware of the breath, we realize that calm does not have to be created. It is already present, woven into the rhythm of life itself. Every exhale is a letting go, a natural release. Every inhale is a renewal, a gentle receiving of what is offered. Anxiety thrives on the illusion that we must fight constantly to secure safety and certainty, but the breath reminds us that life already sustains us without our effort. The body breathes even as we sleep, even when we forget. This realization, small yet profound, undermines the anxious mind's belief that everything must be controlled. In Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is not limited to sitting meditation. The breath is a portable anchor that can be carried into every moment of life. While walking, one can notice the rise and fall of breath with each step. While speaking, one can pause and take a mindful breath before words are released. In moments of rising anxiety, waiting for an exam, anticipating a difficult conversation, or facing uncertainty, mindful breathing can be summoned like a trusted companion. It does not eliminate the challenge itself, but transforms the way we meet it. Instead of collapsing into panic, the practitioner breathes and returns to presence. Anxiety often narrows awareness. It makes us focus obsessively on a single fear, a single potential catastrophe, until the entire field of consciousness is reduced to that one imagined scenario. Mindful breathing reverses this narrowing. By resting in the breath, awareness expands again. The mind recognizes that there is more here than the anxious thought. There is the body, the air, the sounds of the world, the steady rhythm of life that continues regardless of fear. This expansion itself weakens anxiety, because anxiety thrives in the constriction of attention. When we open the lens of awareness, we see that fear is only one passing element, not the whole of existence. The Buddha often emphasized the importance of presence. Anxiety lives in the future, depression in the past, but presence is only ever here, now. The breath is the simplest and most reliable doorway into that presence. One does not have to wait for the perfect conditions or escape to a distant retreat. One can begin with a single inhale, a single exhale, wherever one is. Over time, this simple act becomes a habit, a refuge. The anxious mind learns that whenever it becomes overwhelmed, there is a sanctuary available that requires nothing more than pausing and breathing. The practice also reveals deeper truths about impermanence and non-self. Each breath arises and passes away. No two breaths are identical. The self that worried a moment ago is not the same self that now inhales. This constant arising and fading mirrors the nature of all phenomena, including anxiety. The anxious thought feels eternal when it dominates consciousness, but when one steps back, one sees that it too arises, lingers, and fades like a breath. This insight is not merely intellectual, it is experiential, grounded in the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. By living this truth moment after moment, the practitioner gradually loosens the belief that anxiety is a permanent condition. One might ask, what happens when the mind refuses to settle, when anxious thoughts return again and again, even as one tries to focus on breathing? The answer, in Buddhist wisdom, is gentleness. The point of mindful breathing is not to wage war against thoughts, but to cultivate a different relationship with them. When the mind wanders, as it inevitably will, one does not scold oneself or give up. One simply notices, smiles inwardly, and returns to the breath. This act of returning is itself the practice. Every time we return, we strengthen the habit of presence and weaken the grip of anxiety. It is not the number of times the mind wanders that matters, but the willingness to return again and again, with patience. Over time, the practice matures into something more than a technique. It becomes a way of being. The practitioner no longer seeks calm only in meditation sessions, but carries it into the flow of life. Anxiety may still arise, but it is met differently. Instead of fueling it with resistance, one breathes into it, softens around it and watches it pass. Calm becomes less a fleeting state and more a baseline, a steady undercurrent beneath the waves of experience. This is the fruit of mindful breathing, not the absence of anxiety forever, but the cultivation of a presence so deep that anxiety no longer defines one's reality. Furthermore, mindful breathing is not an isolated practice. It connects naturally to other elements of the Buddhist path. It strengthens mindfulness, which supports right speech, right action, and right livelihood. It enhances concentration, which opens the door to deeper meditative absorptions. It nurtures compassion, for as one learns to sit patiently with one's own anxiety, one becomes more understanding toward the struggles of others. In this way, something as simple as breathing becomes the seed of profound transformation. Consider the story of a practitioner who came to a monastery overwhelmed with anxiety. His mind was constantly racing with thoughts of failure and uncertainty. He confessed to the teacher that he felt powerless, as though his anxiety controlled every aspect of his life. The teacher asked him to sit and breathe, nothing more. At first, he resisted, convinced that something so simple could not help. But slowly, day after day, he began to notice that while his anxious thoughts did not disappear instantly, they lost some of their force. Each time he returned to the breath, he reclaimed a small island of calm. Months later, he realized that his anxiety had not vanished, but it no longer ruled him. It had become a visitor, not a tyrant. This transformation did not come through force or suppression, but through the gentle power of mindful breathing. This is the gift of the practice. It empowers us to reclaim sovereignty over the mind. Anxiety may knock at the door, but we do not have to invite it to stay. We can acknowledge its presence, breathe, and return to calm. This is not denial. It is wisdom. It recognizes that thoughts are transient, that presence is always available, and that the breath is the most faithful companion we have. If you carry anxiety in your daily life, begin with just one breath. Let it be conscious, slow, and full. In that single breath, you will glimpse the possibility of calm. From there, let the practice grow, moment by moment, until it becomes woven into the fabric of your life. Remember, transformation is not about perfection, but persistence. Each return to the breath is a victory, each mindful moment a step toward liberation. As you reflect on this teaching and perhaps even try it yourself, remember that this path is not one to walk alone. Together, we can continue exploring these practices, deepening our understanding and supporting one another on the journey from anxiety to calm. If this teaching has offered you insight or comfort, I kindly invite you, subscribe to this channel so that you may continue receiving guidance rooted in timeless Buddhist wisdom and take each breath as a step toward serenity. Transforming thought patterns through right view and right intention. Anxiety is not merely a bodily sensation or a random set of intrusive feelings. It is deeply connected to the patterns of thought that we cultivate, consciously or unconsciously, over time. Within Buddhist wisdom, the transformation of these thought patterns lies at the heart of the Eightfold Path, especially in the cultivation of right view and right intention. If mindful breathing serves as the anchor that grounds us in the present moment, right view and right intention serve as the compass that directs the mind away from cycles of fear and confusion toward clarity and calm. Without them, even the calm cultivated by breathing can be easily disrupted by distorted perceptions or destructive mental habits. But with them, anxiety begins to lose its foundation as the mind learns to perceive reality more clearly and to orient itself with wholesome purpose. Right view begins with seeing the world as it truly is, not as the anxious mind imagines it to be. The anxious mind is notorious for distortion. It magnifies danger, clings to certainty, and interprets neutral events through the lens of threat. A single mistake becomes evidence of total failure. A moment of uncertainty becomes a sign of impending catastrophe. This is not reality, but a mental construction built from fear. Right view, as taught by the Buddha, is the antidote to this distortion. It reminds us that all things are impermanent, that suffering arises from clinging, and that liberation is possible. In practical terms, this means recognizing that the anxious thought, however convincing, is not ultimate truth. It is simply a conditioned mental event arising from causes such as past experiences, cultural conditioning, or habitual fear. By holding this perspective, we weaken anxiety's ability to dominate the mind. This shift requires practice. When an anxious thought arises, "I will fail this task. They will reject me. Something terrible is going to happen." One can pause and examine it through the lens of right view. Is this thought a reflection of reality, or is it a projection of fear? Is it impermanent, subject to change like all things? Does clinging to it reduce suffering, or does it intensify it? By asking such questions, the practitioner begins to see that most anxious thoughts are not truths, but passing phenomena. They may have some basis in possibility, but they do not define the present moment, nor do they have the certainty that the anxious mind assumes. This realization opens a space of freedom in which the thought can be acknowledged without being obeyed. Right intention complements right view by addressing the orientation of the mind. Whereas right view clears perception, right intention directs the heart. Anxiety often arises from intentions rooted in craving, aversion, or delusion. The desire to control outcomes, the fear of what might happen, the confusion about our own capacities. Right intention asks us to cultivate three opposite qualities: the intention of renunciation, the intention of goodwill, and the intention of harmlessness. Renunciation here does not mean abandoning life, but releasing the compulsive clinging to control that feeds anxiety. Goodwill transforms the anxious mind's self-criticism into kindness, while harmlessness reduces the tendency to imagine harm or danger in every possibility. Together, these intentions create a mental climate that is less fertile for anxiety. Consider the anxious person who constantly worries about the judgment of others. Their right view might remind them that such judgments are impermanent, often imagined, and not ultimately defining. Their right intention might then encourage them to replace fear of rejection with goodwill toward themselves and others, recognizing that connection grows from authenticity rather than from anxious striving. Over time, this dual practice weakens the habit of self-doubt and nurtures calm confidence. Transforming thought patterns is not about suppressing anxiety or forcing oneself to think positively. The Buddha did not teach blind optimism, but clear seeing. He acknowledged suffering, but also taught the way beyond it. In this spirit, the practice of right view and right intention asks us not to deny anxious thoughts, but to place them in their true context. They are clouds in the sky of mind, not the sky itself. They may pass repeatedly, but they cannot alter the vastness of awareness that holds them. One powerful method for cultivating right view is reflection on impermanence. Anxiety thrives on the illusion of permanence, the idea that this fear, this uncertainty will last forever. But nothing lasts forever. The anxious thought that seems unbearable now will fade, just as countless thoughts have faded before. By remembering impermanence, the practitioner loosens the grip of fear. Similarly, reflection on non-self undermines the anxious mind's identification with every thought. If the anxious thought is not truly mine, but simply a condition arising and passing, then it need not define identity. This perspective does not eliminate anxiety instantly, but steadily erodes its power. Right intention can be cultivated through daily practices of compassion and renunciation. For example, one might begin each day with the silent affirmation, "Today I will let go of what I cannot control. Today I will cultivate kindness toward myself and others. Today I will avoid harm in thought, word, and deed." These simple intentions, repeated consistently, reshape the patterns of mind. When anxiety arises, the practitioner recalls these intentions and redirects attention. Instead of spiraling into fear, one remembers the commitment to kindness and letting go. Over time, these new patterns replace the old, and calm becomes the default response rather than agitation. It is worth noting that anxiety often masquerades as responsibility. We tell ourselves that worrying is a way of preparing, of being careful, of avoiding mistakes. But right view reveals the flaw in this reasoning. Preparation is useful, but worry is repetitive and unproductive. It does not solve problems. It only multiplies suffering. Right intention helps us distinguish between wise concern and unwholesome worry. Wise concern leads to action, studying for the exam, preparing for the meeting, saving for the future. Worry, however, cycles endlessly without resolution. By holding to the intention of harmlessness, we recognize that worry harms the mind without helping the situation. This clarity allows us to act where action is possible and release where it is not. Stories from Buddhist tradition illustrate this transformation. One such story tells of a monk plagued by anxiety about death. He could not sleep, for every night he imagined his end approaching. The teacher did not dismiss his fear, but guided him to reflect on impermanence with right view. Death will come, but it is not here now. Each breath you take is life. Do not let imagined futures steal the life of this moment. With this reflection, combined with the intention to live each day with compassion and non-harming, the monk gradually loosened his fear. He did not conquer death, but he conquered the anxious thought of it, and in doing so, he discovered calm. From a modern perspective, we can see how these teachings align with what psychology calls cognitive restructuring. Anxiety often stems from distorted thinking, catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, or assuming the worst. Right view is the Buddhist equivalent of challenging these distortions, while right intention aligns with choosing healthier patterns of motivation. But unlike secular psychology, Buddhist wisdom grounds this practice in the deeper truths of existence: impermanence, non-self, and the cessation of suffering. This depth gives the practice not only therapeutic value, but spiritual significance. As we transform thought patterns, we must also cultivate patience. The anxious mind has been conditioned over years, often decades, to follow certain grooves. Changing these grooves requires repeated practice. Each time we notice an anxious thought and reframe it with right view, each time we redirect intention from fear to goodwill, we carve a new path in the mind. At first, the old path still dominates, but with persistence the new path deepens, until one day the mind naturally flows toward calm rather than anxiety. This is not magic, but the natural law of cause and effect applied to the inner world. It is also important to remember that right view and right intention are not abstract concepts to be mastered once and for all. They are living practices, to be revisited daily in each situation. Anxiety arises in many forms: fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, and each requires fresh application of these principles. But the more one practices, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, even in moments of great stress, the mind remembers, this is impermanent, this is not myself. Clinging will only increase suffering. Let me return to calm, to kindness, to harmlessness. In that remembrance, anxiety begins to dissolve. Thus, the transformation of thought patterns through right view and right intention is not only possible, but inevitable for those who persist. The anxious mind is not fixed in stone. It is a flow of conditions, which means it can be redirected. By seeing clearly and orienting the heart wisely, we shift the very foundation upon which anxiety stands. In its place, calm arises, not as a fragile state to be preserved, but as a natural expression of a mind aligned with truth and compassion. As you reflect on this third teaching, consider how you might apply it in your own life. The next time an anxious thought arises, ask yourself, is this true or is it a distortion? Is this thought permanent, or will it fade? Is clinging to it reducing my suffering or increasing it? And then ask, what intention am I following now? Is it fear or kindness? Is it control or letting go? In these questions lies the seed of transformation. If you nurture it with patience and practice, calm will inevitably grow. And as we continue this journey together, I encourage you, do not walk alone. Join in this exploration of Buddhist wisdom, where each lesson builds upon the last, leading us steadily toward freedom from anxiety. If this reflection has spoken to you, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel so that you can continue receiving guidance, support, and inspiration on the path from fear to serenity. The power of compassion and loving kindness to dissolve. Fear, anxiety, thrives on isolation, on the belief that one is alone against the weight of the world. When we are anxious, the mind often contracts into a small, self-focused circle. Everything revolves around me and my problem, my fear, my future. The body responds as if under siege, and the heart closes off, perceiving life as a hostile force. Buddhism teaches that one of the most transformative ways to counter this contraction is to expand outward through compassion and loving kindness. Where anxiety narrows, compassion broadens. Where fear hardens, loving kindness softens. The cultivation of these qualities, known as karuna and metta, does not merely improve one's relationships with others, but directly dissolves the roots of fear within the mind itself. To understand why, we must look deeply at the nature of anxiety. At its core, anxiety is fear. Fear of what might happen, fear of not being enough, fear of being hurt or rejected. Fear is self-protective. It arises from the instinct to survive. But while this instinct can save us in genuine moments of danger, it becomes destructive when it dominates life, perceiving threat in every shadow. The Buddha saw clearly that much of human suffering arises from this misplaced fear, and he taught that the antidote is not greater control or avoidance, but the cultivation of an open heart. Compassion and loving kindness transform the anxious self by shifting focus away from the endless defense of me toward a genuine care for the shared experience of all beings. When one practices loving kindness, the anxious spiral is interrupted. Instead of rehearsing the endless what-ifs of disaster, one silently repeats, "May I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease." These simple phrases are not wishful thinking, but seeds planted in the soil of consciousness. Each repetition reorients the mind from fear to benevolence, from contraction to openness. The anxious thought still arises, but it finds less fuel in a mind warmed by kindness. This is not only directed inward, the practice then extends to others. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. Even those we fear or dislike are included, for the practice is meant to dissolve barriers, not reinforce them. At first, this may feel artificial. An anxious person might say, "How can I wish happiness for others when I cannot even find it for myself?" But this very act of wishing begins to reshape the heart. Anxiety often tells us we are powerless, but loving kindness reveals that we always retain the power to choose how we relate to the world. In the simple act of extending goodwill, we reclaim agency, and the grip of fear loosens. Over time, the repetition of these intentions reshapes the subconscious. The default mode of suspicion and worry gives way to a baseline of trust and warmth. Compassion deepens this transformation by addressing suffering directly. Anxiety is painful, and often we respond to it with judgment, criticizing ourselves for being weak, berating ourselves for worrying too much. This only adds a second layer of suffering. Compassion invites us to turn toward our anxiety with the same tenderness we might offer a friend. Instead of saying, "I should not feel this way," we say, "This is suffering, and suffering deserves care." When the anxious heart is held in compassion rather than scorn, it begins to soften. The fear is no longer an enemy to be fought, but a wounded part of ourselves asking for understanding. This practice can be profound in daily life. Imagine lying awake at night, thoughts racing about the uncertainties of tomorrow. Instead of fighting the thoughts or demanding they disappear, one places a hand gently on the heart and whispers inwardly, "I know you are afraid. May you be at ease. May you be safe." This is not indulgence, but healing. It interrupts the cycle of fear and self-condemnation, creating space for calm to emerge. The body responds as well. The nervous system shifts from fight or flight toward rest and restoration because kindness signals safety. What is most remarkable about compassion and loving kindness is that they not only soothe the individual, but also transform one's relationship to the world. Anxiety thrives on the illusion of separateness. We believe we are alone in our struggle, unique in our fear. But when we cultivate compassion, we realize that suffering is universal. Every human being fears loss, rejection, and uncertainty. To recognize this is to dissolve the isolation that fuels anxiety. In that recognition, the heart connects with the vast community of beings who walk the same path. One no longer suffers alone, but participates in a shared humanity. This awareness itself brings calm. The Buddha often illustrated this with the image of a mother's love. Just as a mother holds her child with unconditional care, we are invited to hold ourselves and others with the same embrace. When the mind is bathed in this attitude, fear loses much of its sting. It is difficult for anxiety to dominate a heart that is full of love. Love and fear are opposing forces. When one grows, the other diminishes. Thus, by cultivating compassion and loving kindness, we do not fight anxiety directly, but starve it of the environment it needs to thrive. The practice is simple, though not always easy. It can be done in meditation, repeating the phrases of loving kindness, gradually expanding them from oneself to loved ones, strangers, and even adversaries. It can also be done spontaneously throughout the day. When meeting a colleague, silently wish them ease. When passing a stranger on the street, send a moment of goodwill. When feeling anxious, offer compassion to oneself. These small acts accumulate, creating a new habit of heart. Over time, the anxious mind, which once defaulted to fear, begins to default to kindness. This shift may be subtle at first, but its cumulative effect is immense. One story tells of a monk who was sent to meditate in a forest known for its dangerous spirits. At first he was terrified. Every rustle of the leaves felt like a threat, but instead of fleeing, he practiced loving kindness, radiating goodwill not only to the animals and spirits, but even to the forest itself. Over time, his fear dissolved, and the spirits, it is said, became his protectors. Whether one believes the literal tale or not, the lesson is clear. Fear transformed into safety when met with compassion. Anxiety, too, can be dissolved in this way, not by fleeing or fighting, but by opening the heart. Modern science supports this ancient wisdom. Studies show that practices of compassion and loving kindness reduce anxiety, increase resilience, and even alter brain activity in regions associated with fear and empathy. The heart rate slows, the stress response diminishes, and the sense of connection increases. What Buddhist practice has taught for centuries is now confirmed by research. Kindness heals and compassion calms. But the true power of compassion goes beyond temporary relief. It shifts the very meaning of suffering. Anxiety, instead of being a personal curse, becomes a bridge to empathy. When we recognize our own fear, we begin to understand the fear of others. Our suffering opens the door to solidarity. This transforms the narrative from "Why am I afflicted?" to "May my struggle help me understand and serve others." This orientation infuses even difficult moments with purpose, and purpose itself calms the restless heart. To live with compassion and loving kindness is to create an inner refuge that no external storm can shake. Anxiety will still arise, it is part of the human condition, but it will not dominate. Instead, it will be met with warmth, dissolved in kindness, and integrated into a larger vision of life that includes both joy and suffering. The anxious heart becomes a compassionate heart, and in that transformation lies true freedom. As you sit with this teaching, I invite you to try it. The next time anxiety arises, instead of resisting it, place your hand on your heart and offer yourself a kind phrase. May I be safe, may I live with ease. Then extend it outward. May all beings be safe, may all beings live with ease. In that moment, you participate in a tradition that has soothed countless hearts for centuries. If you nurture this practice, anxiety will gradually lose its grip, and calm will naturally take its place. And as we continue walking together on this path of Buddhist wisdom, I invite you to remain connected. These teachings are not meant to be read once and forgotten, but practiced, returned to, and deepened. If this reflection has brought you comfort or clarity, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel so that you may continue to receive guidance and inspiration, and so that together we can cultivate compassion strong enough to dissolve even the deepest fears. Equanimity, the art of remaining steady amid life's storms. Calm is not the absence of storms, but the ability to remain steady while they rage. If mindfulness grounds us and compassion softens us, then equanimity completes the transformation by giving us the strength to face life's inevitable turbulence without losing balance. In Buddhist wisdom, equanimity, upekkha in Pali, is one of the highest states of mind, a profound stillness that does not waver in the face of pleasure or pain, gain or loss, praise or blame. It is not indifference, nor is it apathy. Rather, it is the strength of an open heart that neither clings to what is pleasant nor resists what is unpleasant. For the anxious mind, equanimity is the antidote to the constant swinging between hope and fear, between anticipation and dread. It teaches us that true peace is not found in controlling circumstances, but in liberating the heart from their tyranny. Anxiety thrives on attachment to outcomes. We fear losing what we love, failing in what we attempt, or facing the unknown future. Each of these fears is rooted in clinging, the belief that things must be a certain way for us to be safe or happy. But life is impermanent, and circumstances shift beyond our control. The anxious mind reacts to this reality with panic, trying desperately to hold on to stability where none exists. Equanimity, however, accepts impermanence as the nature of things. It says, "Let the winds blow, let the tides rise and fall. I will not be carried away." This acceptance is not resignation, but wisdom. It recognizes that we cannot control the storm, but we can choose how we sail within it. The cultivation of equanimity begins with observation. When anxiety arises, instead of immediately reacting, one pauses to notice it. What is the bodily sensation? What thought triggered it? How does it move through the mind? By observing without judgment, we begin to see anxiety as a passing weather pattern rather than as the definition of who we are. This distance creates space, and in that space, equanimity can grow. The thought, "I am anxious," shifts subtly to, "Anxiety is present." This change of language is profound. It transforms identity into observation, burden into experience. And once it is seen as experience, it is easier to let go. Equanimity also involves the cultivation of perspective. Life is vast, and yet anxiety shrinks our view until only the object of fear remains. A small mistake feels catastrophic, a temporary uncertainty feels eternal. But when we step back and see the larger picture, fear loses some of its urgency. A storm, however fierce, is still part of a larger sky. Equanimity teaches us to rest in that larger awareness. It is the recognition that everything arises and passes, that no single event defines the whole of existence. When this truth becomes lived experience, anxiety weakens, for it relies on the illusion of permanence. The Buddha described equanimity as freedom from the 8 worldly winds: pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. These winds blow constantly through life, and most people are tossed about by them, elated by success, crushed by failure, proud in praise, humiliated in blame. Anxiety arises because we are always anticipating the next gust, fearing loss or craving gain. Equanimity, however, stands firm in the middle. It does not deny pleasure or pain, but meets them both with balance. It does not resist the winds, but lets them pass through, knowing they cannot shake what is rooted in wisdom. For the anxious heart, this teaching is revolutionary. It shows that freedom does not come from controlling the winds, but from standing steady within them. Cultivating equanimity requires both inner practice and outer reflection. On the inner level, meditation is a powerful tool. When sitting quietly, we can observe the constant arising and fading of sensations, thoughts, and emotions. Some are pleasant, others unpleasant, but each one passes in its own time. By training the mind to observe without clinging or resisting, we strengthen equanimity. At first, this may feel like indifference, but over time we realize it is a deeper engagement, an engagement without entanglement. We are fully present, but we are not enslaved. On the outer level, equanimity grows by reflecting on the universality of experience. Everyone experiences loss and gain, joy and sorrow. We are not singled out by suffering. We are part of the human condition. This recognition dissolves the anxious mind's tendency to personalize everything, to believe that its own fear is unique or unbearable. Instead, we see that we are participating in the same dance as all beings. This broader perspective makes fear more bearable, for it is shared, and in that sharing we find solidarity and calm. Equanimity is also supported by wisdom about karma, the law of cause and effect. Anxiety often arises from trying to control what is beyond our influence, other people's opinions, the unfolding of events, the twists of fate. But equanimity reminds us to focus only on what lies within our sphere of influence, our intentions, our actions, our responses. We plant seeds with our deeds, but we cannot control how the weather treats them or how others respond. This wisdom frees us from the burden of responsibility for outcomes we cannot govern. When we act with integrity and compassion, we can rest in equanimity, knowing we have done our part and the rest is beyond our control. A powerful metaphor often used in Buddhist teachings compares the mind to the ocean. On the surface, the waves rise and fall, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent. Anxiety lives on this surface, tossed by every change. But beneath the surface lies the deep, unmoving stillness of the ocean floor. Equanimity is this depth. When we cultivate it, we are no longer enslaved by the waves of thought and emotion. They may rise, they may crash, but we remain rooted in the calm depths. This does not mean ignoring the surface, but remembering that the surface is not the whole. Anxiety may rage, but beneath it there is always stillness, waiting to be recognized. Equanimity also redefines what it means to face uncertainty. The anxious mind craves certainty, believing that safety depends on knowing exactly what will happen. But life is inherently uncertain. Equanimity does not seek to eliminate uncertainty, but to embrace it. It sees uncertainty not as a threat, but as the very nature of existence. By learning to rest in uncertainty, to remain open to whatever arises, we free ourselves from the exhausting attempt to control the uncontrollable. This openness is not passivity, it is courage. It is the willingness to meet life as it is, moment by moment, without fear. In practice, equanimity often develops through the small moments of daily life. When someone criticizes us, instead of collapsing into shame or lashing out in anger, we pause and breathe, remembering that praise and blame are both temporary. When we lose something we valued, instead of drowning in despair, we reflect on impermanence and allow grief to move through us without resistance. When success comes, instead of clinging to it with fear of loss, we enjoy it fully and let it pass when its time is over. Each of these moments strengthens the muscle of equanimity until it becomes second nature. There is a story of a monk who meditated under a tree through all seasons. In summer heat, in winter cold, in storms and calm, he remained. When asked why he did not seek comfort, he replied, "The weather is beyond my control, but the mind can learn to remain steady." This is equanimity in action. Anxiety constantly tries to change the weather of life, to demand that it be always sunny, always safe. But equanimity accepts all seasons, knowing that each has its place. By training the mind in this way, we no longer fear the storms, for we have learned to stand within them without being swept away. Equanimity also brings freedom in relationships. Much anxiety arises from attachment to how others see us, from fear of rejection or loss. Equanimity reminds us that others' opinions are beyond our control, and that their changing perceptions are just another set of worldly winds. This does not mean we become careless or cold. On the contrary, equanimity allows us to love more deeply, because our love is no longer bound by fear. We care, but we do not cling. We give, but we do not demand. This kind of love is stable, steady, and free from the anxiety of possession. For those living in the modern world, where uncertainty and change are constant, equanimity is more important than ever. It is the inner stability that allows us to navigate chaos without collapsing. It is the clarity that sees beyond panic to the broader truth of impermanence. It is the calm that comes not from controlling life, but from releasing the need to control. By cultivating equanimity, we discover that calm is not fragile, but unshakable, not dependent on external conditions, but rooted in inner wisdom. To practice equanimity, one can begin with simple reflections. All things are impermanent. I cannot control everything. Gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, all pass. These reflections are not meant to make us detached in a cold way, but to remind us of the larger truth. With each reflection, the anxious mind's grip weakens. In meditation, we can watch thoughts arise and pass without judgment, training the mind to remain steady. In life, we can practice responding with calm rather than reacting with fear, each time strengthening the habit of balance. Equanimity does not promise a life without storms, but it offers something greater, the ability to remain at peace within them. It is the art of living fully without being enslaved by fear. It is the wisdom that anxiety cannot touch, because it rests in truths deeper than any passing worry. When equanimity is cultivated, calm is no longer a fragile state to be defended, but the very ground of being upon which all else rests. As you consider this teaching, I encourage you to begin practicing equanimity in small ways. When anxiety arises, instead of resisting, pause and observe. Remind yourself that this too will pass. Reflect on impermanence, on the shared human condition, on the futility of clinging, and most of all, trust that calm is not something to be earned, but something already present beneath the waves of fear. Each practice, each reflection, brings you closer to the steady heart that cannot be shaken. And as we reach the conclusion of this exploration, I invite you once again to continue walking this path with me. These teachings are not only philosophy, they are practices to be lived day by day, moment by moment. If they have spoken to you, if they have offered even a glimpse of calm in the midst of anxiety, then I ask you kindly, subscribe to this channel. Together, let us cultivate equanimity, so that no matter how fierce the storms of life may be, we may stand steady, open, and free.